I'm Sunny Bates and delighted that you are all here tonight. This is our first standard talk of the season, and I think we're all really interested in this subject of what the future of relationships look like, and is there something beyond monogamy? And we have a great group of people tonight to explore this, both from a philosophical, from an actual practical perspective, and then from a therapeutic perspective. But I promise it won't hurt a bit. So starting from my very far left, your right, is the wonderful Esther Perel, who many of you probably know, or it seems to be. She's one of the world's most original and insightful voices in exploring couples and sexuality across cultures. She's fluent in 9 languages. She's a Belgian native, and she speaks on emotional and erotic intelligence, work-life balance, cross-cultural relations, conflict resolution, identity of modern marriage and family. She's a TED favorite. Her talk is over 2.5 million viewings and rising every day.
That's enough.
That's enough. But I could go on and on and on, couldn't I? I won't. I'll stop now. Next, Esther, we have Diana Adams, who is an out and proud polyamorous queer bisexual New York City-based attorney, activist, and educator. She's a fierce agitator for sexual civil rights and non-traditional families, and an advocate for clients who wish to start families with intention and legal stability. Diana also represents parents in child custody cases whose non-traditional sexualities may be turned against them in court. And then we have Reed. We've got to have a man here, right? And a good one, too. So we've got Reed Mahako, who's a sex and relationship expert. My mic is bouncing back and forth. I don't know if I'm doing something or, okay. Who's a sex and relationship expert, and to date, he has amassed over 150,000 conversations with men and women about sex and relationships. He's got an art school degree from Brown University, a personal favorite because both my girls are there. And he founded an internationally acclaimed non-sexual communication workshop called Cuddle Play, or Cuddle Party. He's thrown an orgy for Emmy-nominated journalist Lisa Ling on the Oprah Winfrey Network. So this is such an interesting and charged conversation. What I want for both of you to start with is, how did you come to polyamory? How did you come to your world as it stands right now in your work?
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Yeah, you do it. You're right there next to me, yeah.
Can I get nervous when I speak? Can anyone take a deep breath? Let's go, oh. Thanks. So my mom and dad loved each other very, very much. My brothers and I watched them. We'd catch them making out in the kitchen and stuff like that. But their inability to communicate eventually kind of tanked their marriage, even though they stayed together. My mom became an alcoholic. My dad tried to fix it by working more, which is what my mom didn't need. And they eventually ended up losing everything and living in their van. So that kind of set me off. I'm like, how do I not be like them? And then in college, I fell in love with 2 women at the same time. I was deeply in love with
You were in high school, first time?
Yeah, my first high school love. She and I were still dating in college, and then I fell in love with a woman in my art class who had a brown eye and a blue eye at the same time. Fascinating.
So that's nice.
And
falling into her eyes.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I didn't know how to reconcile it, because culturally speaking, it must mean that I wasn't really in love with Lauren. Or that I wasn't ready to settle down. There was a lot of cultural stigma, and that was the beginning of me trying to figure out, like, what the fuck? My genius was, if they just met each other, they would get how awesome they were, and it'll all work out somehow. And I went to my roommate, and I'm like, who was my karate instructor at the time, I'm like, Sensei, I'll just have them meet each other, and they'll get it. And he looks at me and he goes, that is the stupidest fucking idea.
And he's right.
Yeah. And he was. Like, it was a really bad idea. But now looking back, what's really interesting about it is I realized I was actually practicing, my intuition was on target for 2 really key things. One, I was just trying to make everything transparent and just try to get everybody to talk about what was going on. And 2, I wouldn't find this out until like 25 years later, I wasn't dating my species. And I fell in love with 2 women who happened to be monogamous And so the idea of us all trying to live happily ever after, for them, was such a bad idea. And later I would figure out, well, if I was dating my species, everything changes, and I'll talk more about that tonight.
Diana?
So I have a similar story of learning what not to do from my family. And I came from a background in which I saw many marriages in which women were under economic duress to stay in marriages that weren't happy, and that were often very controlling, very possessive. I saw a lot of jealousy in my family life. I saw my uncle storming around if my aunt would be friendly with somebody we had over for dinner. And as a little girl playing house, I always knew that I wanted to be a mom. I always knew I wanted to have a big career, but I knew I didn't want to have a husband like that. And as I got older, in college I found feminism, and I was acknowledging that I was bisexual. And so for me with that, I wanted to be able to explore relationships with women. I wanted to be able to fall in love with women. I didn't want that to just be an experience of having a one-time threesome with my boyfriend, which was actually his fantasy, not mine. And whenever I brought it up to boyfriends, that was what they ended up suggesting. And I also felt as a feminist that it was very important to me that nobody possessed the right to decide what I did with my body. I wanted to do what was right for me to do with my body, and I wanted to just be open and honest and communicate about that and find people who were happy and wanted to celebrate what I wanted to do with my body. And so for me, wanting to be open in my relationships was not just about sex. It was about the rights to wear what I wanted to wear, to stay up all night talking or cuddling or dancing with someone I was excited to connect with, because connecting with people is a really intrinsic part of who I am. And so I felt really rebellious from that image. And in college, I was dating the captain of the crew team, who was a very handsome man who would someday be very wealthy, who wanted me to be his pampered princess. And for my working class background, this was the American dream. And he was also really controlling and really possessive. And when I talked to him about being bisexual and said, I don't think I can get married and never fall in love with a woman and feel really happy with my life. I'll always wonder what that would have been like. And he'd say, sweetie, I'll do whatever you want, I'll get you whatever you want, but don't ever talk about that again. And I just pictured my life living in a fancy house, drinking a lot, sleeping with the maid and the pool boy. And I felt like I had the freedom that women in my family didn't have to create my own life, and that I had the responsibility to take that. So after college, I looked for the community in New York of people interested in open relationships, and that's how I found polyamory and realized other people have done this before, learn from them.
Esther, can you tie this up in a
No, the first thing I'm thinking is from sexuality as a duty to sexuality as a pleasure, from the idea that you can even think about what do I want and what kind of relationship do I want to be in. This is a very small minority of women in the world who have that privilege, and it is so precious, and I don't know that we value it enough. That level of emancipation of who do I want to live with and how do I want to live with them, and to what extent do I experience my giving myself and all of that. And then I think what stands out is the transparency.
Yeah.
You know, everybody negotiates monogamy. It's just that most straight people negotiate it with themselves. They generally practice proclaimed monogamy and clandestine adultery. That's been the model. You know, what you're doing differently is the experience that, you know, you don't want it to become an illicit thing. You don't want it to be something you should be hiding, you should be ashamed about, you should keep secret. You actually see it as a legitimate right of how you want to experience multiple loves. And it's not about sex, it's about the experience of connecting on multiple levels with different people at the same time. That's a whole different conversation. To my mind, and that probably will be the rest of the evening as well, the conversation on monogamy is the next frontier.
And you talked before about there's been so much innovation around family and different kinds of family units, which is very different from what's going on in terms of couples and how people think about couples.
Because, you know, we have blended families, single parent families, surrogate families, sperm donor families, egg donor families, you name them. You have an alternative models of families that have really proliferated. And when it comes to relationships, to couples, we've pretty much remained with one single dominant model of the romantic ideal, which half the people collapse at, and then we think that they're the ones who have a problem. We never question the model. So this is very interesting, how we've become much more flexible in thinking about multiple family configurations, and we do not know how to embrace more than one model when it comes to relationships. And there's not this or that, but you cannot have one scripted story for something that's that complicated, and we know we live twice as long. It's a long time.
And we have Craigslist.
And we have Craigslist. Craigslist, Ashley, Madison, you guys find each other. These right into it, don't they? Yeah.
Well, I mean, so, you know, for me, like, having fallen in love with two people and trying to reconcile that, and I was monogamous. Like, I was good at monogamy, it just didn't make me the happiest. And it took me a while to start to figure out, like, I need to be really honest with myself and honest with the people I was dating. Like, I want to be with other people. And for me, just so you guys know, because it wasn't what I'm about, I'm a huge slut.
That's true. So put some numbers, if you would.
Whatever you think is a lot, put a 0 on the end of it. And yes, but like, so for me, like, and my primary partner, Allison, is here tonight, and we'll out her later. And she knows. But the idea of, like, I had to be honest with myself and then start being honest with the people I was already in love with. And then we would try to open up the relationship, and that, like, when you try to open up a relationship that started off as closed, that's very, for me, it's problematic. I wouldn't recommend, it can be done, but it's delicate. So then eventually what was missing there was, because I was pairing with people who were monogamous, I needed to pair with people who wanted open relationships as well. Not just in theory, but were really interested in that as a self-expression. And I'm not here to recruit you all, because for me the wisdom and the evolvedness in relationships is you choosing the relationship style that works for you, and then dating people for whom that style is also, you know, compatible. We're taught in culture, like, if relationships are music, classical music is the zenith of musical expression. And you might go to conservatory, work your ass off, maybe you're even good at classical music, but you're not as happy as your roommate who fucking loves Chopin. And you're just good at it. And then you walk into a jazz club, and then you're like, oh, I'm a jazz musician. And so if you look at relationships like music, you know, how does the music of relationships come through you? And are you starting bands with people who like to play the same music? That's evolved. But again, culture tells us it's classical music or not. And so then you end up being classical, but then you slip out, you know, late at night to play some jazz. And that pisses off the orchestra. What was the question?
I know you just right in anyhow. Beautiful. Diane, you've got some big fun in there too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think that relationships that were open have been so much more successful for me when I've been doing that with people who are fully invested in that as well. And I completely agree with Reed about that idea of dating your own species. And in my partnership with Ed, who's wonderful and amazing and in the second row, I have really created something from the beginning where we decided to be open, and that was much more successful. We were both really excited about it and willing to put the effort in, as compared to many relationships before that when I had been monogamous and I was successfully monogamous, but I just wasn't really as happy doing that. And I had many relationships where it was like, okay, fine, you know, if it's really important to you to date women, you can, but it was sort of like, if I have to sleep in a bed of nails to be your partner, I'll do it, you know? And even when I was monogamous, I was a very independent person, and that's a different relationship style as well. I'm a very independent person. I want to have my hobbies and travel, and I'm not ever going to be a person who wants to spend all the time as a couple. And so really finding that and creating that has been a wonderful journey, and I think that through experience, Ed and I have really talked through and spent some years having hard conversations, and now it's relatively easy, and that's really wonderful, and it's been wonderful to grow through that.
When you think so practically about that, how do you guys deal with jealousy? How do you deal with the different kinds of emotions that I think come up between couples? And how different is that in polyamory, or is it not? Is it something you continually work on, or is it something that is absent from the way that you interact with your partners?
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through jealousy, and that's one of the great teachings, I think, of being consciously open, is rather than just experiencing jealousy and having it be this sort of blunt object. It's not a very descriptive emotion. It's sort of like, I'm sad, angry, jealous, happy, you know? What kind of jealous are you? What are you feeling? And in our culture, it's been really acceptable to use jealousy as an excuse for all sorts of bad behavior. You know, I punched him because I was jealous. I threw a drink in her face because I was jealous. Well, instead of just feeling that as, oh no, you're jealous, stop everything, we've really had a practice of inviting that feeling in and thinking about what am I feeling and being able to separate this out.
Do you have a specific example?
Yes, I do. So one example of working through jealousy has been being able to separate that from something like envy, and I'll let Reed talk a little bit about different kinds of jealousy. One example was that in the beginning of our relationship, there was a really wonderful, beautiful woman that Ed wanted to spend time with. We were talking about this last night, and the details are fuzzy. I remember her as being in Maxim magazine. He doesn't remember that detail. The most important thing is he barely remembers who I'm talking about. He's like, oh. But I remember at the time being very triggered, and anytime he was spending time with a really beautiful woman, I'd feel really threatened. And I'd have this, I want to cut that bitch feeling. Right? You know what I mean, right? Back the fuck up. And he's a really sexy rock star scientist slash DJ, and always has these wonderful girls in Burning Man outfits kind of bouncing around his DJ booth. And when I would feel upset, rather than just react and throw a drink in her little fluffy pink outfit, I would take a step back and think about it and actually learn something about myself from that. And what I learned by listening to that feeling was, when I'm feeling jealous, what I'm actually feeling is he probably would rather be with her than me because she's more beautiful in some conventional way. And that was the voice of me at 13, who thought that, you know, I'm the funny, fat, smart girl you want to have as your best friend, but if you could be with a regional cheerleader, you would, right? And that's the voice that says, don't wear short sleeve shirts, you have fat arms. I don't listen to that voice anymore. Yeah. I'm a grown-ass woman. And so, by realizing that, I was able to say, okay, this is not actually a threat. Talk to him about it, and let him know I'm feeling some insecurity about this, not because you're doing anything wrong, but be able to get some sympathy for it and get some affirmation that he wants to maybe have sex with her a couple of times and be pleasant with her and treat her with respect, but then, you know, doesn't have much to say over dinner, was pretty much what he said. And I want to spend the rest of my life making love with you. No, of course I wouldn't want to leave you for her. And getting affirmation about that made it really empowering, like, yeah, girl in your fuzzy leg warmers, you can borrow my man. I know he's coming back. You know? And it's a very empowering feeling to be able to move through that and be able to separate that out from something like, okay, no, I don't want you to date my roommate because that would cause problems in our relationship. Or, I want you, if you go on vacation with somebody else, to go on vacation with me too. So there's different ways of piecing that out, and it doesn't mean there's no boundaries. We definitely say no to plenty of things, but we think through it rather than just operating from a sort of blind insecurity. So I feel like it's been a wonderful personal growth process, and I've actually learned a lot about myself, and we've created a relationship in which we can say anything.
Wow. How about you? Yeah.
Matt's got pink fuzzy leg warmers in my So for me, jealousy, so there's a lot of different ways you can approach jealousy. I like to think of it as well, first off, we live in a culture where we're supposed to avoid it. So most people are ill-prepared on how to handle it when it comes for you. And then you're supposed to like avoid it at all costs because jealousy will destroy everything. You know, and we have examples of like, you know, people killing, you know, shooting people because they're jealous. Like, so like the stakes can be high, but I like to think of jealousy like asthma. And if you know people who have asthma, or if you have it, like they teach you like, know your triggers. And then you learn how to avoid your triggers. And then we can start like the process of inoculating you against your triggers. And for me, jealousy is more just like a signal that you probably have needs underneath that you haven't put into words, and they're not getting met. So if you have insecurities, then the need is for reassurance, a particular kind. And if your partner can reassure you in that way, all of a sudden the jealousy, the asthma attack becomes less. It's not a guarantee, but at the same time, like I'm not one of those people that believes that you just eradicate jealousy forever. You know, I don't suffer from it very much, but that's problematic because when it does hit me, it clobbers me. and I don't realize I'm feeling jealous. Like I lose my sea legs, and I have to remember. And Allie's really good about being like, no, you're jealous. And I'm like, oh. But then I'm a geek, so I'm like, oh. Like we've actually have a jealousy sighting. Now we can study it. And people don't get excited about getting triggered in that way. And so that your emotional IQ and your emotional kung fu you're not prepared for the stuff when things come for you. And it's gonna come whether you're in a monogamous relationship, whether you're single and just having envy or jealousy at the workplace, or whether you're dating 5 people who sit in the second row.
How do you think about what makes an enduring relationship? I'd love for you to chime in this, Esther, so when you think about that, because there's different metrics here. It's not necessarily
But my head is filled with a lot of the things that, because this time I'm in the role of you're the storytellers and I have to be the conceptualizer. Typically that's not my role, but here I'm thinking. First, we've got 2 main words, right, so far. We've got monogamy, we've got jealousy. So the first thing, of course, for me is like, what is monogamy? And because we are all using the word, but what do we mean by that, right? And what is its implication? I mean, typically monogamy used to be one person for life. Now it's one person at a time. That's one massive change. Okay? We arrive at our committed relationships in adulthood most of the time, at least in the West, having been sexual nomads. So monogamy, what? As sexual exclusiveness? On some level you could say that at this time, at least in our circles, monogamy exists primarily in reality, meaning it doesn't exist in your memories and it doesn't exist in your fantasies. So it exists primarily in reality. Think about it. That's a very different story than my parents or, maybe your grandparents at this stage. So that's the one thing. Then the notion of the sexual exclusiveness is very different when you arrive to a committed relationship, marriage, whatever you call it, as a virgin, or when you arrive and you actually can remember what it was like with another. That's a whole other story. Then there is jealousy. In some way, if you practice monogamy as in sexual exclusiveness, then you have to grapple with monotony. And if you practice non-monogamy, then you have to grapple with jealousy. It's kind of pick your thing, but because there is there's no ideal situation. And some of us are probably more willing, more prepared to deal with the tribulations of jealousy, and others of us are more prepared to deal with the tribulations of monotony. So but I don't know which one is more complicated. I think for some people, struggling with monotony is much harder than struggling with jealousy, and vice versa. Some people are more afraid of losing the other, and some people are more afraid of losing themselves. That's a tension that exists in every couple. I would probably think about jealousy not as much as I would think of it as a fear of abandonment. And that's why the reassurance becomes so important. The reassurance says, you matter. But you don't matter from a position of you are the only one and you are exclusive, but you matter from a position of you are unique. And that's 2 different models. We can have a model of relationship that emphasizes exclusiveness, and then we're dealing with borders, with what you can, what you can't, the restrictions, what is in and what is out. Or we can have a model of relationship that deals with uniqueness, which means there are others, but you're special. It's 2 different stories.
Mm-hmm. And you can even go deeper into the jealousy piece, because sometimes when I'll teach it, jealousy is an octopus, and there's fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of insecurity. And it can be an erotic
enhancer too, for that matter.
Well, and in some cultures, like in Latino cultures, jealousy is how you prove that you care about somebody.
That's right.
So we're also sitting here, from an American style of jealousy. Well, the international style of jealousy. But when you start geeking out on it, you can start looking at different frameworks, which my mom and dad never looked at. And these frameworks, the distinction between jealousy and envy, that jealousy is, I want the person who's having that experience with you out, and I want to replace them. And this is just my version of it. And then envy is, I want the experience, and when I really think about it, go off with the burner chick with the fuzzy leg warmers. I want to go do what you guys are doing. Maybe I'll go do it with somebody else. And this is important stuff to know too, in the workplace. when I teach jealousy in colleges, most of the students who are coming are trying to learn how to wrestle with jealousy in their classrooms, not in their relationships, because they know that in the boardroom, jealousy is going to kill them.
Envy.
Yeah.
And envy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you differentiate?
Covetousness is about
Yeah.
How do you differentiate?
Well, so envy is, I want the experience. I want a job promotion too. The jealousy is, I want to kill you and take your job. Or your partner, or your whatnot. And again, like, these are just my frames of reference for it.
But can I add another
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
I also think that even particularly something that Diana said before about the issue of boundaries, right? There is no relationship without boundaries. That's, I mean, you want to know, you know, it's like if you don't want to be alone, you need two, but if you want to be a couple, you need three. And it's the management of that third that actually delineates what is a relationship. But monogamy is not a static concept, it's a continuum. You know, and everybody that negotiates in their head, you can play it. If you don't want to talk about negotiating monogamy, you can play, so what would it be like? At what point do I think I cheat? Do I think I cheat when I think about another? Do I think I cheat when I flirt with another? Do I think I cheat when I pay for another, but it's not really real because I'm paying? Do I think I cheat? You know, at what point do I actually think of transgression? The reverse of that is, where do I consider myself on a monogamous continuum? And the concept of continuum is not present enough, and that's what you have when you have the conversation. You know, it's not a in, out, closed, open. That is not a very helpful concept in my hand.
And you've really chosen the transparency and not to be living secrets, typically in relationships. What's the role of secrets in polyamorous relationships? Yeah, that's
Birthday parties. You keep secrets for presents and surprise birthday parties.
You don't think there is something in us that, despite all the permission, still wants to break the rule?
Well,
especially.
I can say
oh yeah!
I am not into breaking rules, and I really love having the trust and openness with my partner to say anything and not have anything be taboo. At the same time, when I have experiences with a partner or a lover, I don't necessarily share every detail of that. There's something really magical about the privacy of my connection. And my partner might want to know, you know, how's everything going? You know, what sex acts did you do? Did you use safer sex? Great, awesome. But we don't need to go into sort of all of the details of the way that I play with different people. And I think there is something magical about that kind of privacy.
We mistake transparency to mean that we don't have a right to privacy. So there are things, you have a right to privacy, but you should probably talk to each other about what that looks like, because the talking about it helps set up expectations in a good way. Like, most people do not handle surprise well. So when you surprise them with something, they usually flip out, especially if it's something about the relationship that you've been doing what for how long? And most people don't have the emotional wherewithal to realize, oh, I'm surprised right now, that's why I'm flipping out. Oh, honey, I'm surprised right now, that's why I'm throwing things at you. I'll be fine in about 20 minutes. Like, no one taught us to do that. So the idea that you can be open and honest, but you still get to have your secrets, especially if keeping secrets is erotic for you. You get to have your privacy and your own sense of self. You don't have to share everything, and your book, Mating in Captivity, is great about that. But again, like, lying, in my worldview, is different than keeping a secret or having stuff be private.
Yes. because it's beyond the negotiated boundaries. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's just stupid. Like, if you want to ruin a relationship, start lying.
Yeah.
You don't think somebody's going to find out?
Because you find out about everything.
Yeah.
No secrets at all.
Especially with Facebook and the NSA, especially if you work for the NSA. If your boyfriend or girlfriend works for the NSA, you're screwed!
And I work with lots of families as a family mediator, sometimes helping people set up relationship agreements about non-monogamy. Sometimes I'm helping people deal with child custody after there's been an affair and a breach of trust. And it's, in that context, I think it's so much harder to rebuild a broken trust in a relationship. It really puts people at a place of much further separation. And it's so much easier to negotiate, I think, or to be with people with whom you can negotiate a common agreement.
Talk about polyamory in terms of families, because that's something I know you do a lot of work with.
Sure, absolutely.
It feels like in some ways you can see it for a couple, but then does it break down, particularly when you're talking about long-term relationships? And
so people build polyamorous families in many different ways, and so there might be a structure that's like mine, in which we have a really strong primary couple bond, but have other chosen family who might live with us while we have children, other people who will be involved. We want our lovers to be aunts and uncles to our children, and be ongoing stable parts of their life. There's also people who co-parent perhaps as a polyamorous triad. I work with many people where there's 3 people who want to create family together. And in any of these kinds of situations, the real key is stability. And oftentimes, conservative social scientists will sort of debate and argue that, well, children need stability, and marriage means stability. Therefore, children
divorce
need marriage.
50% means instability.
Right, and so, but there's a real jumping there of stability equals married, when I think people can really create intentional families, and I think that by sitting down with families and giving them choices, by having them realize monogamy is one of your possible options, and you can define what monogamy means for you, or what an open relationship means for you, and thinking clearly and intentionally about who wants to be in the child's life, and talking about what does that mean. Once we decide you're Uncle Joe, that means no, even if we break up, there's no ditching out on this child, and you're a person we've known for a long time that we want to introduce to the child this way. Whereas that's different than, you know, lots of poly people are people who have big communities and have a guest room that's always got a friend in it, and that might be different. But that there's a difference when somebody is being introduced to the child as a parental figure who cares for them and spends time with them. There's a great book coming out soon, The Polyamorous Next Door, which is a study on polyamorous parents, and found that the polyamorous kids were doing really well. They have 3 or 4 adults in a household who are giving them love and attention, and I think that can be great for kids.
It's not that it can be great. On some level, the nuclear family is a disaster.
Right, absolutely. And honestly,
2 adults with 2 children
Yeah.
is the greatest, waste of resources that was ever created. This was not meant to be like this. So we've got everything to learn. You know, this sentence, when you talk about, somebody went out to study that polyamorous families can produce healthy children. It's like what we used to do with gay families, right? We went to study to see that their children were not, having mental health problems. Come on.
Absolutely.
It is intention. I mean, wherever people spend a lot more time thinking, talking, being intentional, being, engaged with something, which most people who are part of a set model don't do, because all you have to do is just enter the model and let yourself be carried. Typically, children will do better. End
I feel like we've got so many great people in the audience, and I know people have questions, and that we can keep going like this and there'll be lots, but let's open it up for other questions, and we're opening up these conversations, and we're opening up relationships as well. Yeah? Thought you jumped in.
I'd like to hear about your relationship with Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein.
This is an insider piece.
No, this is, I think, it's an important one.
Maybe you need to repeat the
So,
question for the back.
my wonderful lover, Lex, who's a science fiction geek, was just asking about Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein, which is a great book. And I don't know if other people here have read that, but that was a book that was actually really influential in terms of an idea of a water brotherhood, and really kind of presented a different idea of sexuality and connection and people building family. That was not something that was a turning point for me, but there are a lot of people who were inspired by that in the 70s and are still sort of interested in creating their own kind of family utopia, and that's been a really influential book. Any other thoughts on that?
I've never read it.
On Stranger in a Strange Land?
Yeah.
I wish I was a Martian. They could do cool things in that book. No, I mean, like, we don't have a lot of examples. Like, how many of you know? How many of you grew up with knowing kids that grew up in divorced families, if not yourself, that were like healthy? They grew up healthy. How many of you know people who grew up in families that stayed together that are completely screwed up?
Of course.
Like, we have examples of alternative families now. It doesn't have to be so scary. And what we don't have in popular culture is a lot of examples of non-monogamous polyamorous situations where things aren't completely filled with drama. And the more that we have role models where you can be like, oh, this works, or okay, maybe this works for me. What's a little bit tricky, and there's lots of different ways to do monogamy too. But like, there's a lot of different ways to do non-monogamy. And so, you know, the work out there is for you to figure out what works for yourself. And then, like, you know, how do you find the watering holes that your species are at?
How do you find the watering holes your species are at?
Well, Google helps. You know, but again, like you know, Meetup is a great place. Like, start typing in the things that you're interested in. The way that I go about it and the way that I figured out for myself is I started asking myself, what are the things I think I don't deserve? What are the things I think no one will love me for? Now that, for me, because I have this kind of like walk towards the gun for myself, like I walk towards my fear because that's where my greatest growth is. Your mileage may vary. But like, when I started asking myself, well, what am I think no one's gonna love me for? Is I'm like, well, I wanna sleep with a lot of people and have them all happy with me. And I think no one can love me for that. And then I started like asking around, and then, you know, there's this polyamory community, and they're like, oh yeah, we can love you for that. I'm like, no, you can't. And they're like, yeah, come here. And that was hard, because then I had to start dealing with abundance issues. Yeah. But like, it's not easy being this easy.
Scheduling. How do you guys handle this? I mean, because you described your situation, Diane.
I'm an incredibly busy person, and I run my own law practice and just hired an associate for that here in New York. I teach at Cornell Law and travel to Ithaca. There 2 days a week. I travel around the country at least once a month speaking at conferences. So I have very little time for date nights just with Ed. So that's something that I constantly am checking in about what feels right in terms of making sure that as a primary relationship, we make time for each other first. Mm-hmm. And so we've been really committed to at least trying to have some time together every week when we can. And then other people in my life, I might have one really epic date night a month with them. And sometimes people might say, well, but how's that really a relationship if you're only seeing each other once a month? But it's a different kind of relationship. It's not like we're trying each other on for marriage and we're becoming serial monogamous or spending all their time together. It's not building toward anything, it's just connecting for the sake of connecting, which is a really wonderful way to date and have partnership. And so if we have one really epic connected date a month for the next 50 years, where we talk about what's going on in our lives and have sex if we feel like it, that's fantastic with me. And I really appreciate that ability to connect with people, partly because I was one of those women who was, for a while in New York, you know, feeling like I needed to be husband hunting, the way a lot of professional, successful women do when they get into their early 30s, where it's like, okay, I don't have any time to talk to people who don't have a graduate degree or a job at my level. And so it would be like, oh, you're fantastic and you make me laugh and I have a lot of chemistry with you, but you didn't graduate from high school and you're a barista. Okay, next, you know? And it was harsh. And now I can connect with people because I want to connect with them, and maybe because they're actually really different from me and we can learn something from spending time together and getting closeness. So I really love that. And I have wonderful partners here. I don't know if I should introduce them now or later. Okay, great. So they're all in the second row and they can stand up and mention it if they want to. If they want to, no pressure.
And then the video began.
Some people have like a +1 they bring. I'm like, just reserve me a row. And it's something that I really take great pleasure in because I speak at a lot of stuffy law professor conferences and everyone will be like, and here's Mr. So-and-so's spouse and here's Mr. So-and-so's wife. And I'm like, here's 2 of my wonderful partners wearing coordinating suits. And what's great is that because I own it and because I'm really great at what I do, people accept it and people have been really, really respectful about it. And it's been fantastic how being open has actually been something which has not been a detriment to my career at all. And in fact, I think people admire that openness. But to tell you a little bit more about the wonderful relationships in my life, so I mentioned Ed and the wonderful connection that we have. And we're hoping to have this wonderful commitment ceremony this spring at a wonderful kind of hippie place in Woodstock. We're not getting legally married by choice, but we're getting labyrinth ring tattoos and designing our own ceremony, and we're really excited. And hoping to start trying to get pregnant soon. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, and I feel like we have a pretty fantastic love affair. And we went on a romantic vacation with one of his female lovers for a week just a few weeks ago, and we're meeting her in California in a few weeks for Polyapalooza, which is as great as it sounds if you're interested. And other wonderful people in my life. Ari is a really wonderful man in my life I've been seeing for about 8 months, and we have a really special connection. And just last weekend we went to a policy conference. He joined me for a road trip down to DC, and I got totally sick because I've been traveling all the time. My immune system died. And he took 2 trips to the pharmacy and was totally happy to skip the conference, to just hang out in the hotel room and watch movies with me. And we have a really wonderful, special connection. And Matt and I have been seeing each other for about 2 years, and we also have a wonderful, playful connection, and we threw a wonderful charity fundraiser last year at his family's restaurant, and he's helping with creating space for the poly events that I do here in the city, so we have a lot of other collaboration. And Lex has been in my life for about 4 years, and actually started, of all things, as a wrestling partner, because we're both into wrestling and martial arts, of all things. And has developed a really close relationship with my elderly parents, which is really beautiful, and helped clean out their basement, and has become good book trading buddies with my 76-year-old dad who has dementia, which is really beautiful. So all of these people are people who are just in my life and are some of my best friends. And if I wasn't being sexual with them, I'd still want to have dinner with them once a month. If they were in a monogamous relationship at some point in the future, I'd still want to keep up this connection. So that's a little bit of what my life looks like. And I think people often imagine, how do you possibly have time to be involved with all of these people? And for me, I think people and connection, learning about people, is really what juices me up about life. Like, some people might have a really serious skiing hobby. I have a people hobby. You know, I love people, I love connection. I also have a really wonderful female partner who's long distance, who's visiting this weekend. So I feel really surrounded by love. I think my child will be really surrounded by love, and I feel incredibly grateful. And we chose to be out partly because we didn't see models of what the relationship that we wanted, and wanted to be able to provide just one example of what people can create. And I don't think this is right for everyone. I think it's challenging, but I think that just as we talked about, every relationship has its challenges. And I know that I do much better in my relationships when they're expansive and when there's openness and freedom. When I was monogamous, the challenge for me was that I had a lot of fantasies that I had to completely suppress, and I had to kind of kill my erotic self in order to maintain monogamy. And it really killed the eroticism in my long-term relationships. And I think that these other connections juice me up. They keep me vital. They keep my erotic self alive. And I'm able to play with different dynamics. I'm able to play with the part of myself that's the protective butch lover who's like, what did you say to my girlfriend? I'm able to come home from being, you know, a lawyer for 100 people and speaking at conferences and having everybody want me to tell them what to do all the time, and just be the baby girl for a big man who wants to protect me. And that's really reassuring sometimes. It helps me do my job better. And I like to play the dominant queen sometimes and boss a man around. I love all these different sides of myself, and I think by exploring them, I actually nourish my relationship with my primary partner. And people often ask me, if you're so happy in your relationship, why do you need to do this? Well, I'm not living my life based on what I need to do. I'm living my life based on what I can do. And this is feeling really wonderful and delicious. And I love having these experiences, partly because there's some things I don't want to experience with my primary partner and different dynamics that I can play with.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, God, I have other questions here.
So I'm just going to add to this piece. So the friendship piece, like, and Diana and I have been friends for a long time. Like, I just like fucking my friends.
Well, what's it? So is it different than friends with benefits?
Those are my friends. But like, I have some friends I don't sleep with, but not many. But the idea is, if you look at your friendships, the people that you can't do without, the people that you see maybe once a month or maybe once a year, and just imagine, like, don't imagine too graphically, but like, if you had an intimate physical relationship with them too, and you loved them just as much, and it was a good fit, that's kind of the only difference between us and my brother and sister-in-law who have their friends that they go on vacation with together. They're just not all sleeping in the same bed. You know, and the other piece here is I think there's a change going on where it used to be, and some people still do this, dating and relationships is kind of based on an attraction economy or model, where I'm going to try to do and be everything that I need to be to keep you attracted to me, to attract you to me, and to keep you attracted. Versus, I'm going to do and be what makes me happiest. I'm going to be as self-expressed as I can and see who's attracted to that. And the attraction model takes a lot of work. And you end up being somebody that you're not. And the person you date or marry ends up being somebody they're not. And you do that for 20 years, and no wonder you guys are pissed off. The self-expression model isn't easier. It's simple. But you have to do the work to figure out what makes you happiest, and then you have to have the chutzpah to go out and be vulnerable and put that out there. I am a huge geek and pretty much a dork. And most of my communication skills, the ones I teach, are this is how you be a complete dork and still get laid. And it works if you're not a dork too. Because it's about being clear and being communicative and being vulnerable. And now we're shifting into a place where that kind of vulnerability and transparency and, you know, like emotional wherewithal, that's money to people now. Like, that's being a grown-up, even if you don't have all the answers.
Very sexy.
I hope.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you developed that? Because
Take the mic.
yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about how to develop that? Because you began with talking about I wasn't in bars with my same species, and I think, Diana, you have been talking about how you know what you wanted and you sort of went for that. But one of the things that I wrestle with constantly in my own life is I don't know what I want, and I feel like my experiences, I wouldn't necessarily put them in terms of polyamory, but it's sort of like I hurt people, and I don't always know what I want in a relationship. And I find that sometimes, you know, when I hear your experiences, I think about the way that I would contextualize that in my own life, and it's definitely not from the perspective of, oh, like I can be empowered by knowing what I want. I feel like I've made a mistake. So I'm curious if the difference is knowing how to communicate, how you then recognize those instances when you've maybe transgressed, versus when you found something about yourself that you need to explore more, and how you then develop a conversation or the ability to articulate what you want with potential partners around that.
Do you want to?
Well, but I have one thought, just that's on the more general front, but that stands out from what both of you are saying. You know, you said it softly, but I want to highlight it. Why do you need to do this? Is the implication that if you had everything you want at home, you wouldn't have to go elsewhere. Because there is the predominant model, one person for everything. Everything that family, companionship, economic support, social status, and best friend, and trusted confidant, and passionate lover to boot all in one.
Good luck.
And if you don't have that, then maybe you need to go compensate somewhere else. You know, it's a compensation theory. It's not a complementing. So the beginning is that you realize in which model you're in. Both of you talk not from the place of a model. You just said, I knew where I was, and I knew that I needed to find people who, neither of you talked about the model. You talked about your parents.
Yeah.
But you don't talk about the larger sacred cow of the romantic ideal, that with one person, you're never going to want anything more anymore, because you and they are going to be oh so extraordinaire, then you're never going to want anything else. And that is what fucks people up.
You're here.
And I've met some people who are the box that we're given for culture. They fit perfectly in. It just works for them. Classical music makes them the happiest. They got lucky. You know, whether it's nature or nurture, I don't care. I'm a pragmatist.
Or it's their personality.
Yeah, whatever that is. The way I arrived at it for myself, and this is a quick way of doing it. write down all the stuff you desire that you're like, oh shit, I could never tell that in front of a room of people.
You could.
That,
Right,
and then boil it down and get each one of those things short enough that you can put it on a Post-it note, and then hang out with freaks like us and say, like, here's my Post-it note. What do you think about that? And I'd be like, well, I wouldn't be into that, but Diana, do you want to be into that? Like, the idea is start doing the exercises and figure out what makes you really like, oh, that's usually a good sign that you're heading in the right direction. It doesn't mean you have to tell anybody, ever. But if you leave it just rattling around up here, it is never going to come out of your mouth, except at the worst time possible, which is right before you walk into your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife's, parents' house for Thanksgiving. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be fucking ass. Because the stuff rattles around and it blurts out. Get it out on paper, journal, write. Be like, wow, that's really edgy for me. Do some research on it. Read a book on stuff, like Tristan Taormino's Opening Up, really good book on non-monogamy. But maybe you're into BDSM or kink. It's the same process. Start figuring out what you think you might be into, because being able to say, I don't have a clue, is actually a really high state of awareness, because most people won't even go there and admit that they don't know.
I'd like to also respond too. I agree, Reed, and I think I love embracing trying things and learning what I don't like. And I think that's really powerful. And I think sometimes for those of us who have been in the sort of hamster wheel of like, I do everything in life perfectly and there's one right way to do things and I'm on my track, it can be hard to try something and not be sure if you're gonna like it. Just like with careers, like, trying several jobs and being like, oh, didn't like that one, that didn't work. Rather than see that as a failure, take that with awareness and learn what might work for me. And similarly with relationships, I think having as much integrity as you can while you're exploring, having as much communication as you can so that you don't leave too much of a trail of tears. With that said, I left a trail of tears, and that was partly how I learned what I wanted. I tried a lot of don't ask, don't tell relationships with people who said, no, I can handle it, who couldn't handle it. And I learned, if you don't really want to do this, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to be non-monogamous. If I meet somebody and have crazy chemistry and they're not super comfortable and don't want to meet my partner Ed, that's fine, we'll be friends. And I don't try to push anything on anybody that isn't going to want to explore that. But I learned that through making mistakes, right? And so I think embrace that and be willing to play and find people that you feel safe with to sort of explore, whether it be, do I want to get spanked by a woman? Do I want to try an open relationship? There's a whole myriad of possibilities out there.
I mean, in most straight couples, the conversation about monogamy is about 2 sentences. I catch you, you dead.
Right.
It's not a conversation. It's a because the ideal is monogamy is implied. The act itself of discussing it means that there is trouble. Trouble can be that you're immature, or that you're selfish, or that you're not serious for commitment. I mean, there is an enormous amount of stuff that you're kind of banging against. And that's what I think, it's the next conversation. For me, one of the best comparisons is anyways we talk today about monogamy, non-monogamy is what we used to do when we would talk about premarital sex, called fornication. I was reading the laws today about, that was incredible.
Premarital sex is called fornication.
Well, yes, and it was criminally charged. And if they calculated how many months the woman was pregnant after she was married, and they could know if it had been from her husband or not. I mean, this was surreal stuff. So I was thinking, it's really interesting. You would have thought before premarital sex, you would have been a slut, you would have been immature, you would have, it's the same words, transposed. And that is the new conversation. If people could understand that today, probably more than ever, monogamy is going to be negotiated. It's just that some people are going to do it with themselves and some people will have the courage to do it with each other. Most of us are going to have 2 or 3 relationships in our adult life anyway, right? Marriages or not marriages. But some of us are going to do it with the same person.
And I see
others will divorce in order to be able to be monogamous again.
Right. And I see this as a problem in some couples who will come to me who might be saying, okay, one of us wants to be open, non-monogamous, one of us wants to be monogamous, and then they'll come back in a month and they'll say, we figured it out. I told her she just really needed to grow up and learn how to commit and get over her commitment issues, and so she's decided that she's willing to do that, and the other one's just rolling their eyes. And you know,
or I told him or her to go with me swinging or go lifestyling, so that and you know that one person is not. See, because I don't think most people necessarily mate with a person from their species. They don't take that as the primary thing with which there are so many other things for which they want to be with that person that is not about their sexual or relational compatibility. And then this to me is the prime thing: one yes, one no.
And also, just to say, the way that we run our relationships, there's so many other ways to run things. Like, it's not, oh my God, if I'm poly, I have to have 5 boyfriends who show up at every event I go to and wear coordinating suits. Well, I know most of them. Yeah, or you don't have to be a slut like me. Like, there are poly folk out there that they're just looking for 2 people to be in a relationship with, and have a little, like, it basically looks like monogamy. It's just that there's more than a couple. There's a couple of like it's a triad or a quad or something like that. Like, there's so many different ways to do this. It feels overwhelming. But what you're being overwhelmed by is, holy shit, there's more crayons in the crayon box than I thought. There's like, you get 1 crayon. It's like you went to the Italian restaurant and they give you 1 crayon to draw on the dinner table. Like, now I'm giving you a box of 156 crayons with the crayon sharpener on the side. And you're like, oh my God! Like, just go slow, take baby steps. And if you're dating people, tell them really soon what you're up for and what you're trying to create or explore. Because it's better for you to scare away the wrong people immediately. Because we know a lot more about brain chemistry now, what happens when you fall in love. And basically, when you're in love, you are on crack. That is why some of your friends meet somebody at some weekend retreat and then rent the U-Haul on Monday. They are on crack cocaine in their brains and making no rational choices. So just know this.
It's called passion. Why do you take the poetry out of it?
No, I'm just saying. You're going to become addicted. And it's okay.
Taking the poetry out of it is something interesting to think about, isn't it? Because the romance and poetry, does it, when you are negotiating and talking about everything and being open about it, does it, I guess if you're dating within your species, it isn't.
It's hot. Okay. Right? Like, because when you meet people who are like, I like to play this kind of music, and I want to form a band and tour the country, and they're like, me too.
I love that.
You're just being explicit.
We've got a question here, Bob. Go ahead.
I'm a bit concerned that there's too much of a strong dividing line being made between people who might be poly and people who aren't. When I met my partner 20 years ago, she said, if you ever sleep with anybody else, I'll kill you. And we were extremely monogamous for 7 years. And then we sort of figured out a new way of being. And for the last 13 years, we've been open with a large number of really fantastic relationships that we've had along the way. And it's made it very clear to me that these very, very clear dividing lines that we think exist don't. And I just want to sort of suggest to everybody that and Diana, I think, has been brilliant at bringing out the idea that you just have to talk to each other. It is in talking to each other that we start to understand the possibilities of what could happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
I also think that it's a very beautiful example that you give, that we don't live by one model only. And if we're going to have long last, that's what I mean when I say some of us are going to have 3 relations. I'm 30 years with the same person, It's not possible today to have one marriage. It's just that you're going to have either one marriage, one relationship. You're either going to have it with one person, or you're going to have a multiple with different people, and you can do the official divorce, or you can do the renegotiation of the boundaries. We grow. We become more self-accepting. We become more confident. Our needs change. We straddle our needs for security and adventure differently. Some periods of our life we want exploration, some periods of our life we need anchoring. And that whole thing needs to be fluid. And you can go back from that period and even go back to another form of monogamy. You know, I think all in all, the conversation is about introducing fluidity, not that you're either going to be this or that. Long life monogamists can become poly, and long life poly people may one day realize that they're feeling more vulnerable or they have changed and they want something else. The point is we don't have one story for something that's that complicated called relationships.
I absolutely agree, and I want to point out that I think the point that we were making is if you had something in particular that you need, make sure you negotiate that up front. Mm-hmm. Because I talk to couples where it's like, he's got a very serious foot fetish, and she's Catholic and doesn't like to have sex and thinks that's gross. So we've got a problem here. Yeah. You know? Or if you start out saying, you know, I'm really into BDSM and you're really not, that could be a problem. Or if one of you really wants to be poly, I think that's an issue. But I have definitely seen many couples who have an evolution, and there might be some time in the future, as Ed and I have talked about, if there's a time where, God forbid, our child is sick or we're having some crisis in our family, where we're not going to be as interested in dating other people. The partners who are in our life are going to be supporting us in other ways. And that's a natural evolution.
Stefan?
Haven't you seen that the whole issue is gender specific, meaning that there's many more guys who would want to have open relationships than there are women?
No, I have not seen that. And in fact, I think that the polyamorous community is very female dominated in some ways. That a lot of the outspoken people are female. In fact, we had to think, the authors are female. We had to think, who's the guy who's going to be on the panel with all these loudmouth women?
Get him!
I think that throughout all of history, it has been completely sanctioned for men to acknowledge that. In fact, it has been even more strengthening to be men if you acknowledge it. And it has been the opposite for women. If you change the cultural discourse, you may find that, in fact, if we stop thinking that women are less interested in sex and in long-term relationships, they lose all interest, and we think that it's because they are less desirous of sex, but we turned it around and we actually thought, maybe, in fact, women are more quickly bored with monogamy than men. But the only permission that they have had is to say that they're not interested in sex, rather than to say that they're interested in other sex. We actually know more and more in research that women lose interest much sooner, not because they have no interest in sex, but they have no interest in the sex they're going to have.
There's this famous study, Steven Pinker quotes it in his book.
Mike, because the people in the back can't hear you.
It's a famous study that Steven Pinker quotes in his book among homosexuals in San Francisco before the AIDS crisis. Mm-hmm. So everybody could behave however they wanted. And the most impressive outcome for me in there was that there were 26% of all male homosexuals had over 1,000 partners, and 0% of the women had over 1,000 partners. Meaning in the whole study there was not a single woman that could find over 1,000, but it was 26 or 27% of the males.
But let me add a twist to this. I know these studies, and I think we don't actually know the nature of women, since it has been controlled forever. You know, all I can think of is if women were so domesticated by nature, why did every society spend so much energy in controlling female sexuality? She's not intending to go anywhere anyway. Something about it doesn't click for me. However, the next thing I would say is most studies that look at sex look at intercourse. And that is a very male definition of sexuality. Hence, we talk about lesbian deathbed and all of the stuff, because we only think sex comes in that form. If we took the entire range of physicality and physical sensual expression, maybe we would realize that women are not that less sexual than men sometimes. That's the other piece. Look at the question that is formulated. Having sex means in and out.
I love you, Esther.
Right behind you.
Right on to everything you just said.
This is a mutual admiration society. Go ahead, jump in.
How do people talk to their parents about their special arrangements?
Beautiful question.
Good question.
Oh, that's been really challenging for me. I'll talk about that. My dad was one of the heads of the New York State Right to Life Party when I was growing up. He's a fundamentalist deacon, an incredibly conservative person. And if I had not been deciding with my partner, Ed, that we were going to be in the New York Times and we were going to do media about our polyamorous relationship to sort of be positive role models, I probably would not have come out to my dad as soon as I did. But it was incredibly difficult. It still is challenging sometimes. He just asked me last week, I have a question to ask you. When you try to get pregnant, is it going to be just with Ed or is it going to be with some of the other guys? And I said, just with Ed. And he was like, thank you, Jesus. He's been praying about it, he said, right? So we talk about it, we grapple with it, it's challenging. At the same time, my parents have had really positive experiences with a lot of the poly people in my life. They've seen that they've been people who've stayed with me when I've had some really serious health crisis in my life, and I've had a circle of people around me, and they're grateful that I've got people around me. I've got people like Lex coming and cleaning out the basement and spending time with my dad and singing Julie Andrews duets, you know? So while they're still challenged by polyamory in the abstract, and they find it difficult sometimes, they know that I'm surrounded by love, and meeting the people has demystified it, and they realize I'm not being exploited in any way in this situation.
Excellent. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, when I came out to my mom and dad, it was because I had a girlfriend at the time who was my primary partner, and I also had a boyfriend at the time who was my primary partner. So they were both, equally important to me and close. And both of them were available to come home for Thanksgiving. And I realized if I didn't come clean, if I just introduced Kai as my friend, my other partner, Marsha, was basically going to take my head off and be like, no. So they staged a coup. They're like, we're not coming to Thanksgiving unless you come out. But they did it in a loving way. And I'm like, yeah, like I can't be chicken shit about this. So what I did was I emailed my brothers and my mom and dad, and I said, hey, there's something I want to tell you. This is why I haven't told you yet. And this is a whole difficult conversation formula that you guys can get on my website. But here's what I'm afraid of. Here's what I'd like to have happen by telling you. And here's what I'm not telling you. So I came out that way, gave them all a couple of days to digest the information, and then I said in my email, I'll call you in a couple of days. And I did that because I had a history of just blurting things out, like at Thanksgiving usually. So now I didn't want to do that. I was becoming a better communicator. And so then I called up my brothers, and I'm like, did you get my email? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, and they're like, we love you. And one of my brothers was like, I knew it. But then I couldn't get my mom and dad on the phone for whatever reason. I was getting all nervous, and I finally get my dad on the phone. And my dad used to play football for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's kind of like from the John Wayne school of parenting. Unless he was talking about cars or hunting, he didn't, or football, he didn't really talk a lot. And I'm obviously a chatty Cathy. So he picks up the phone. I'm like, hey, Dad. And he's like, we got your email. Know that we love you. Your mother and I love you. Your mother's worried that we don't have a bed big enough for 3. This is like 5 seconds in the conversation. And I'm afraid with another large man in the house that the toilet's going to back up.
Practical stuff.
No.
Practical stuff.
And I'm like my most, and then he just changes the subject. And I'm like, my most vulnerable piece coming out to my dad, and he's talking about the toilet. But then I realized that was his way and his John Wayne way, like, we love you. And what was funny was my mom just thought, well, if you're in love, and now that my brothers and I were old enough, like we were allowed to sleep with our girlfriends in the same bed, if you're in love with 2 people, well, we just got to put you all in the same bed. Way the story ends, Thanksgiving, all 3 of us are in the pull-out couch. They're not lovers, by the way, and they're not interested in being lovers. And I'm in the middle, and my parents are down the hall, and it's like the Walton's lights out moment. And I'm like, oh I have an idea. And they're like, fuck you. So ultimately, the moral of the story is start practicing getting good at having the difficult conversations. Sometimes your parents or your friends won't handle it well. But the freedom that you get by not having to live a hidden life, again, you get to make your choices where you need your privacy. That freedom is gold. And it's available to you in whatever style you want your relationships in your life to be in. That's the ultimate message.
Okay, we've got another one here, but I'm going to do 2 more questions and we're going to wrap it up, and there's drinks going out for another hour. So, what's that?
Let's take a few and then we know.
Okay, good. Absolutely. We've got one back here, and then we've got Ashley here.
This is a follow-on to that. You guys are both activists. Do you think that probably people ought to come out for the broader cause?
All right, we'll record a few and then we'll take, I was literally going to speak to that, so let's take a few.
Another question. Get another one over here. Liz.
Hi. I guess, Esther, you spoke earlier about sort of this set up some dichotomies between essentially tolerating monotony versus jealousy and sort of a choice of a loss of self or a loss of other. And then Diana, in some ways, it seems like having multiple relationships but maintaining a primary partner is kind of like a balance on the continuum of having some elements of poly and not primary being akin to monogamy, but having sort of this long-lasting special person that will be in your life for a long time as some sort of meeting in the middle in a very broad, sweeping generalization of that. I mean, I'm curious if you guys feel, because I think Esther also said monogamy is the last frontier as this thing that maybe needs to be conquered in some way. Do you feel like there is the possibility of a progressive or healthy monogamy as a special arrangement of the 21st century? Or do you feel like it is entirely the way of the dinosaurs?
No.
Okay, let's do one more question here, which is Ashley wanted to ask you a question. And then we got one more, and then we're going to answer them all together.
Read them all.
Yeah, perfect.
My question is, you guys spoke earlier about jealousy in relationships. You guys spoke earlier about jealousy in relationships and how you manage your primary relationship and the jealousy that would come with having multiple relationships. But how do you manage the jealousy of your secondary relationships between how they feel towards your primary and also how they feel about each other?
And then we have one more question back here, and then Evelyn. Yes?
Hi. One of the arguments against gay marriage, or legalizing gay marriage, is that it would open the floodgates to marrying box turtles and all sorts of other things. And it would also open the floodgates to multiple marriage. Do you have any, is that the next frontier in the legal fight, open marriage?
Yeah, Ed?
Hi, I'm Ed. Just this is actually kind of a prompt. I'd love to hear you speak to aspects of polyamorous relationships that might not be focused on sex, the other things you might get from a relationship with someone other than one person. And for me personally, I think that this might have something to do or be related to the question about men versus women to some degree, or just in general that different people get different things out of relationships, and it might be something that's not sexual, that is your jealousy trigger, for example.
Okay, guys, take it away. Ooh. Yeah, it's just friends here. Yeah.
So the question about out and being activist, I find it a very powerful question because, and I think that there is something culturally different about that. Okay, of course my immediate reference is about coming out as a gay person, and there is a certain kind of identity politics in America that requires you that honesty is full disclosure and not selective disclosure. That if you are selective, it means that you are uncomfortable about it, or that you're hiding something, or that you are internalized oppression with it, or you know, the notion that, and that goes actually back to the question of the parents too, you know, maybe you don't feel like sharing that part of your life with your parents, actually. But I do think that a certain kind of outing here is part of an honesty model, the model of honesty that is total transparency, which is a very American concept, and that it comes with the identity politics, and it's not the same in other parts of the world. So that's on the, should you come out, in my personal opinion, no, it's not a must. You can have this as a part of your life that is private and that you don't want to be a role model. Different things. She wants to be a role model. Not everybody wants that to be a part of the way they situate themselves into the society. And then, what was the question about the monogamy? No, when I say that monogamy is the next frontier, it's not the eradication of monogamy and the meaning of monogamy as sexual exclusiveness. You can have an emotional monogamy. You have a primary commitment to a person that does not necessarily imply sexual exclusiveness. There are different contracts of fidelity. For me, when I say it's the next frontier, it means it's the next conversation that needs to take place. To just assume it and to allow too many people to be unfaithful with all the disasters that that entails, I don't know that that's such a wonderful reality. And I am now writing on infidelity, so I just think sometimes it's like, you know, it's a minefield and a disaster waiting to happen. I think lots of people will create wonderful relationships of monogamy, and for that matter, they may not be lifelong. Maybe the depth of a relationship is going to be more important than the longevity of a relationship. You know, Dan Savage talks about monogamy and about this concept that you're only in a happy marriage if you meet at the funeral home, you know? It's like, you know, I mean, no, maybe you have a long relationship of any kind for a certain period, but it was a meaningful one. Ultimately, I think what we want is to feel that we matter, that we're not here in vain, that nobody will remember us, and that nobody thinks of us even when they're not next to us, that we are held in the experience of other people, in their psyche, in their memory, in their fantasy, all of that. And if that takes place with one or that takes place with multiple, that's the exploration.
And we're moving too in this, we used to use duration as a metric for success in relationships. The longer you stayed together, the more successful you were. Even if it was hell, well, we tried really hard, and wow, you guys must really care for each other that you put yourselves through hell.
50 years of hell, congratulations.
Yeah. and there were cultural reasons why that was, and now we've moved into like happiness is part of the equation, and duration is not the metric we should be using to measure success. It should be depth. So it's not how long the relationship is, it's how honest and how intimate, like the depth that you guys traveled together, whether that's just for a weekend or a night or if it's for 20 years. In the math, me crunching math on this, if you want a relationship to last a long time, your best bet in today's society is to be honest with each other. The walking on eggshells that everyone did in the 1950s and throughout today, you know, like, oh, we won't talk about it because we don't want to rock the boat. That's what sinks the boat. Now you need to be having the conversations you're afraid are going to end the relationship, because that's really your best bet to have the relationship move forward in a healthy way, in my opinion.
Can we play with the legal questions a little bit?
Yes.
And I'd love for everyone to address the issue of what Ed brought up, because I think when you think polyamorous, you think about sexual, multiple sexual partners as opposed to other things you get from people, and I think that's
absolutely. I thought a lot of the threads of what we were hearing was about what's happening next. Where are we going with relationships? And I really think we're in a cultural moment with all of the debates about same-sex marriage, while at the same time, fewer than half of American adults are married and that number is going down. We're really at a pivotal moment for questioning what family looks like, what love and relationships look like in this country. And I think it's really powerful to be out. If that's something that works for you, if you don't have a contested child custody issue, and if you don't have an employer who might fire you, a lot of corporate employers, polyamory, sexuality, that's not something that's protected. So being aware of what your circumstance is. I run my own business, and I have the freedom and the privilege to be able to be out, and so that works for me. But I think there's some power also in speaking just to other people in your life, even if you're not doing media about your relationship. Because I think many people know that they don't want to get married, but they don't have other visible models of what they want to do. And a lot of what I do in my work is try to help people create intentional, stable relationships, whether that be an involved sperm donor and a lesbian couple who want to co-parent as 3, or a polyamorous relationship, or whatever. And I don't think that, to answer the question back here, I don't think that monogamy is going the way of dinosaurs at all. I think that the issue is really having this be something that we can choose. And I think a generation ago, we went through a revolution about careers. Careers were not something that would fulfill your spirit and make you a self-actualized, fulfilled person. You would go on a journey to figure out the right career path for you and have many different careers. You would do the job that your father did, or you'd have a job at a company for the rest of your life, and the goal was just something that pays the bills, right? I think that now the people who have the privilege to are looking at careers to find themselves and figure out what they want to do and have a journey with that. And I think now we're at a moment of being able to do that with relationships as well. In terms of what's happening legally, we are seeing 3-parent families being accepted in this country. There was a successful 3-parent adoption in California and in Alaska, and I'm working with those lawyers and with Lambda Legal to try to do one for New York State. The key model would be an involved sperm donor who wants to be a dad with a lesbian couple. I think that's going to be more politically palatable for people at first, rather than a polyamorous triad. But there's an intention that that would ultimately be a polyamorous triad as well. And I think what we're also seeing is a movement beyond marriage. There were actually tremendous amounts of protests and hostility around Stonewall when same-sex marriage was being celebrated. Because Stonewall was a place of celebrating a queer critique of the nuclear family and institutions of marriage and traditional monogamous sexuality. And in many ways, I think same-sex marriage is one step along the way. But we don't necessarily want to be crowding more people into the institution of marriage. We ultimately want to get the government out of the business of deciding whether you get tax benefits and health insurance and immigration status based on who you're having sex with. And so I think that's what we're going to be seeing next. We'll be seeing 2 people being able to make domestic partnerships, maybe 3 people being able to make domestic partnerships. That happened accidentally in places like California and Colorado, in local areas, maybe because they just wrote their domestic partner statute in a vague way. They'd say any 2 people who aren't related, who are in a committed relationship. And then you'd have all of these old widows whose husbands died, who live together. You'd have the Golden Girls coming in and saying, we want to be domestic partners. You'd have 2 single mothers coming in and saying, we want to live together and raise a child together. So we're seeing that people can create lots of wonderful family connections beyond sexuality, and I think that that's going to be helpful, because I don't think that we're going to see 3 people getting married in this country. I think that we're going to see a separation of government from questioning what's happening in the family. Hey, if 4 people want to, if 4 people want to have an LLC and pay taxes together, it doesn't matter whether they're having sex or they're in a business partnership, right? So I think that's the movement that we're seeing. And in terms of what we get out of different kinds of relationships, I think that it's possible to get needs met by different people, and a lot of those are emotional needs. And I think it's also really valuable to acknowledge that people are building family not just around sexuality. Antonia is here. She's a wonderful woman I've lived with since before I lived with Ed, who's a chosen sister to me, and I'd like her to be involved in raising our child. She's not a romantic partner, but when Ed and I moved in together, it was like, well, why should I have to move out with her? She's my family. You can join the family if you want to. And so I think we're going to be seeing more of these kinds of combinations, and it's always helpful for people to have models of what that could look like.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking, because I think it's such a beautiful question about the dinosaurs, right? But even, no, because if you think monogamy, for most of history, had absolutely nothing to do with love. It was basically an imposition on women in a patriarchal system in order to know to whom do the children belong and who gets the cows. Or the goats or the camels. Pick your culture. But, you know, then it switched. This is a very recent thing, that it has become a kind of a conviction and not an imposition, and it's dual gender, and we're negotiating this thing. You know, that demands a lot of freedom to begin to think of it like that. And everything you describe, if we didn't use the word polyamory, we would be, I could think that you are giving, if I didn't hear that word today, I could hear you do a whole conversation about the creation of community.
Yes.
This is the creation of a community.
Yeah.
You know, where different needs are met by different people, and since the community these days, you know, we're not born in a community these days that gives us our sense of identity and belonging and continuity. We have to go and create communities from a place of individuality. This is what you're doing. Now we add a new word to it, polyamory, because we want the sexuality to be a part of it, and to say that there are some of us that have multiple loves, right? Basically, if that love is sexual or not. I'll give you an amazing example. This is a super young crowd, right? But I am older, and I work with the people. One of the more amazing examples where I'm watching polyamory is in couples where one partner has Alzheimer. Wow. You see, because you have one person who is alive and gone at the same time, and you want to go visit that person every week, but that person doesn't know you're coming, and you need something that sustains you. Because this can go on for 10 years, which what we call ambiguous loss. It's a beautiful concept of Pauline Boss, alive but no longer there kind of thing. You can't mourn them, and they're not really alive among you either. And all these older people are creating other experiences, other relationships. Do they sleep with this new partner? Who knows? And what sleeping looks like at 80 is a very different story anyway. But it is sex. It's the sex of a different generation. It is connecting at a different level, and it is erotically enlivening enough so that you have the energy to go and do your visit once or twice a week. It's a whole other thing. You're going to really see this over the lifespan.
Amazing. Well, I don't know what I love, the Alzheimer's, the polyamory, or the who gets the cows. Who gets the cows is what I'm leaving with tonight. I want to thank all of you so much, and all of you in the crowd here. And we'll be, as I said, the drinks are on until 9:30 outside, and feel free to come up and ask questions. And thank you all for being here. Thanks. One more thing. Esther's wonderful book, Mating in Captivity. Esther's book. She'll be selling it right outside here, and I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, to pick up a copy. This is fantastic. Thank you. Yeah.